Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Generac GP 5500. This is the second of two machines that a local subscriber dropped off. Last week we got the first one up and running. That one was the rougher of the two. So I'm hoping this one will be an easier fix. But yeah, I think we do have our work cut out for us. The tank was replaced, the original one rotted out. We are missing a few parts, but the engine, it does turn over and it has compression, but it doesn't feel that great. So yeah, maybe this one isn't going to be quite as easy as I thought, but you never quite know until you dig in. So let me get you set up a little bit better and get going on this. So first things first, let's level the machine out and check the oil. Now this one was not missing its foot. I actually stole it to fix the other machine. So if this one ends up running and making power, we are going to have to come up with something for that. So let's take a look at the oil next. This machine, he was told, was in good running condition last time it ran, but it has since sat outside for a very long time. So there's a possibility water could have gotten in the system. So let's see if the oil is present and not contaminated. So yeah, we do have oil. Needs to be changed. Does not smell fuel contaminated, and it's not over full. We're pretty much right up to the last thread, so plenty of oil to test with. But I am going to drain, or not drain, but pull the drain bolt and just make sure there's no water sitting in the bottom of the crankcase. So we'll just take a little sample here. If there is water in the oil, usually sits on the bottom of the crankcase. So if there is any in there, it's best to get it out before mixing it with the oil once the engine runs. And no, just oil. So that is a good sign. Yeah, I'm noticing the tank bolts, they're not tight, and the tank is also not hooked up. Now, this is not the original tank. This is actually a Honda clone tank. It's been retrofitted on here. The original one rotted out. But the inside of the tank, despite what it looks like on the outside, it looks brand new. I don't think this tank has ever seen fuel, so that is a good sign. But for now, I'm just going to get the tank off the machine. We'll get it out of the way. And then I want to check the compression. It does feel low, and we had compression issues as well with this machine. The decompression system, it was overly aggressive, and we were only getting about 30 PSI, but thankfully, once running, it had plenty of horsepower, so I don't know if we're dealing with the same thing here, but we'll get a compression reading on the starting point and see where it's at. Yeah, it actually looks like they did a pretty nice job retrofitting that Honda clone tank. It looks like just a piece of angle was used, cut to shape and then welded in place. So yeah, pretty good. Anyway, let's get the plug out, test the compression, and see what we get. A little bit of dust and dirt down there, so we'll get that out of the way. That plug is stuck in there. Not a good sign. Might need the breaker bar for this one. Okay, there we go. Broke free, and it's spinning out nice and easy. Yeah, the plug actually doesn't look too bad. You know, I thought for a second we might have some rust given how stuck it was, but once it broke free, it spun out, and I don't see any rust on the tip of that plug. So I would say the engine, at least the top end, likely did not see any water. All right, so this one should have about 60 psi. It does have a decompression system, so that might vary a little bit between 50 and 70. But anywhere in that range would be good. But based on what I'm feeling when pulling it over, I don't think we're going to see that. So let's pull it over a few times. Choke is open as well as the throttle. Yeah, that's not good. That needle barely moved. So we're at maybe 18 psi. Not much. So yeah, 18 psi, it's not good. You know, I don't think this engine's going to start with that kind of compression, but I'm thinking if we can somehow get it started, then likely that number will come up. You know, likely it is just a bit of rust between the valve and the valve seat, given the amount of time this is sat. So let's give this the best chance possible. I'm going to pull the valve cover. We'll make any adjustments needed there. And then I'm going to get some oil down on the cylinder. That should help bring the compression up and potentially allow the engine to start. Yeah, it's pretty stuck on there. So I'm trying to save the gasket if I can. But I think I'm going to need a bigger hammer here. Wow. Managed to save the gasket. Wasn't sure we would. Looks pretty clean in here. So the intake actually might have excessive clearance, and right now the exhaust is open. So the intake having excessive clearance, that actually could be a sign that this valve is hung open, maybe a little bit. So I might leave that alone, but let's rotate the engine until the intake's open, and we'll check what we have for clearance on the exhaust. All right, intake's open, and there is clearance on the exhaust. It actually feels pretty good. But let's just double check with the feeler gauge. See exactly where it's at. So we'll start with 8 thousandths. Does not fit. How about a 7? Nope. 6. Yeah, it's a tight 6. So, yeah, if anything, that might be a little bit too tight. I have to double check the spec on this. I want to say it's 6 thousandths and 8 thousandths. But even where it's at right now, it shouldn't be letting out so much compression that we're at 18. But if we open that up a little bit, it could help. But I'm thinking likely the issue is the intake. Anyway, let me look up the spec and come up with a plan. So the exhaust, it should be at 6 thousandths of an inch. And right now we're closer to 5. So I'm going to open that up to the higher side of the spec, which is 7 thousandths, and see if that does anything as far as our compression goes. But I would say likely not. You know, increasing this theoretically will bring it up a tiny bit, but we need more than a tiny bit. So my money's on the intake. I don't think it's closing quite all the way. So, you know, it might be worthwhile putting some oil in the top end and maybe pulling the starter recoil and just spin the engine over without compression. Let that valve open and close a bunch. And potentially it might start to seal a little bit better. Yeah, it actually tightened up. So that's common when you tighten these lock nuts. Takes the slop out of the threads and changes the clearance just a little bit. So I'm going to turn this back a little bit. See what that gets us. Yeah, that feels pretty good. It's on the tighter side of 7. But definitely bigger gap in there than what there was. So let's just double check the compression, see if that did anything. All right, same test. Probably the same result. And yeah, I don't think there was any improvement. Yeah, maybe a little, 20 PSI, so definitely not enough still. So we'll get some penetrating oil in there. And also some Marvel Mystery Oil. And let's get that starter recoil off and rotate the engine at high speed. And maybe that'll break up some of the rust on the intake. All right, let's see if this drill can do it. I've let the magic smoke out a few times on it, so it's just about at the end of its life. Yeah, compression came up a lot. Let's get the tester back on there. All right, so let's spin the engine over again with the compression tester in there. This time we'll spin it slowly. Yeah, and not much of an improvement at all. Or maybe at 22 PSI. So let's do it again, but this time we'll spin it fast. And that should bypass the decompression system. Yeah, and really no improvement. So we're at maybe 30, maybe 33. That's not good. All right, let's see where the compression's going. So I've got a Leakdown tester connected. We're at top dead center, so both valves should be closed. So I'm going to add some pressure, and that's indicated by the gauge on the left. And ideally, these needles would track to each other, and they actually are. You know, I mean, there is some leak down, but that's normal. we're already in the green. And if we bring this up to 100 psi, we can get the actual leak down reading, which is 15%. So interesting. According to this, the engine's healthy, so that just begs the question, why is the compression so low? Not sure. So potentially my compression tester is bad. So I'm going to try a different one. This one, like the other, has the Schrader valve down there where it screws into the head. So it should be accurate. So let's spin this over with the drill and see if the numbers improve any. No, not at all. So we're still pretty low at about 20 psi. So the problem isn't the equipment. We know the engine has low leak down. So that tells me the valves are good. The rings are good. It's got to be the compression release. So I'm going to bump that exhaust clearance up quite a bit. Maybe double what it should be. And we'll check compression again. So I'm going to rotate the engine till the intake's open, which is right there. Although, you know what? I'm going to do this actually the right way, meaning we'll find top dead center. So there's the compression release, and that's what I theorize might be our problem here. And now we're past top dead center just a little bit. So let's open that up. And the intake, we'll double check that as well. That feels loose. And now that we know it's not leaking, I think it's safe to close that up as well. And we're going to go way over spec on this. So on some Honda clones, the exhaust actually can be set up to 9,000s without it being considered out of spec. But given that we're so off on the compression, I'm going to go double the spec to 12,000s. And that will have some effect on the engine performance. But as it is right now, it's not going to start. Unless we do something here. So I set it to 12. Yeah, and it's a snug 12, so I'm happy with that. Let's check the intake. Should be at 4,000s, but I can tell we're way above that. So actually, let's start with 8,000s. And that goes in there with pretty much no drag. So let's bump it up. Let's try a 10. Nope, no drag either. So let's bump it up even more to a 12. And not a lot of drag. So the intake's pretty far out of spec. And a 14 fits, but there is a lot of drag. So the intake is supposed to be about 4,000ths of an inch. So we're significantly out of spec. So we'll close that up probably on the high side of the spec to 5,000ths. Which is right there. And it actually loosened up a little. So let's see how much, if it's close, we'll probably call that good enough. And no, actually a 6 fits in there pretty loosely. So we're going to tighten that up just a little more. Like that. Yeah, 5 feels pretty good, so I'm happy with that. So let's check the compression again and see if we gained any ground. All right, let's try this again, see if compression improved any. Yeah, definitely going in the right direction. We're at about 31 PSI. So still low, but that might be enough to get the engine to start. So let's try to start it. I'm going to get some fuel in the cylinder. We'll get a new plug installed. We'll give it the best chance possible. Get the valve cover back on, start a recoil, and give it a pull. See if it shows any signs of life. So we'll get just a bit of fuel there in the cylinder. And the plug that was in there, I'm going to swap out. Yeah, it wasn't in terrible shape, but it is a no-name brand. So we'll get that replaced with an NGK BPR 6ES. All right, let's give this a try. I've got a light plugged in and turned on. We'll turn the ignition on, which it already is, and the choke probably doesn't matter since we fed the fuel right into the cylinder. So I'm expecting the engine to run a little bit. Not sure if it's going to be enough to get that light to come on. Let's try. Nice. Well, I'm not sure how, but the engine just started first pull. For the brief second it ran, it sounded healthy, and more importantly, the light turned on. So it would seem both the generator and the engine are good. We just need to get the engine running a little bit longer. So let's get the carb off and get it cleaned up. Yeah, so you can see from the overflow here, there was definitely fuel coming out of here. And you can kind of see the same on the gasket. You know, it's all crusted over. So this was flooding over pretty bad at one point. So I believe this carb is empty. You know, at least when tipping it over, nothing comes out. And I do hear the float moving around, so although I don't think it's going to be great in there, don't think it's going to be a total loss. Yeah, some corrosion and rust on that bolt. But not bad. I mean, the bowl, again, some corrosion, but I've seen a lot worse. Needle seems to be moving. Pin slides right out. Definitely a bit of rust, probably from the old tank. So let's see if that main jet will come out. Yeah, it was tight, but it's coming. It's not clogged. Bit of corrosion, but this carb may have actually run the engine. So we'll get the idle set out, as well as the pilot jet, and then we'll just go through everything, make sure it's clear. Give it a soak in the ultrasonic for 5 or 10 minutes. And I'm willing to bet this will run the engine. Although that pilot came out a little bit too easily. There's a bunch of corrosion in there. Yeah, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. If this is running really lean, you know, we might need to replace this O-ring. But as it is right now, I think it will make a seal. So yeah, let's go through the passages. We'll soak it. See if we can get the emulsion tube out. There we go. And yeah, pretty much the same story. Bunch of corrosion. And maybe a few clogged passages. But this will clean up. So the carb cleaned up pretty well. Not perfect though. There is corrosion in the bowl, but it is clean. That should not impact anything. And as far as the carb goes, there is still something up here on the top. You know, initially I thought it was rust, but after scraping at it for a while, you know, it wasn't coming off. You know, it almost seems more like paint. You know, how that got there, I'm not sure. But I would say someone was in here before because, you know, even though there was corrosion down here, there was really no buildup. So I think this was cleaned by someone at some point. So let's get it back together. You know, this carb should definitely run the engine. I guess the question is how well. And we're not going to know until we try, but I think it's going to run the engine pretty well. So we'll get the emulsion tube in and the main jet. bowl back on. This nut also has some corrosion on it, or actually it's a bolt. But this shouldn't impact anything. It's not the main jet, but it is a fuel pickup. And there is an O-ring down here to prevent fuel from leaking out, which appears to be in good shape. And lastly, the pilot. So make sure that is fully seated. And again, it goes in easier than most pilots, but I think it is forming a seal. But potentially, those O-rings might need to be replaced. And the idle set screw. This generator does not idle, but you need it to hold the pilot in place. So just screw it in until couple threads poke through on the other side. Like that. And that should do it. So let's get it bolted back on, get some fuel in it, and try it out. Yeah, fuel is advancing slowly, but it is advancing. So I think we're going to be flooding over here in a second. Actually, I think we're going to be okay. The fuel stopped advancing. So let's try to start it. All right, let's give it a try. Ignition is still on. Choke's on. We've also got the light in the kilowatt. So let's try to start it. Well, surprisingly, the engine started, second pull, and I was able to turn the choke off right away. So the engine continues to run well, the carburetor is running it well, and the generator also looks pretty good. We were producing about 121 volts, 60.5 hertz. So everything is looking good. Now, the only concern I saw when running was that there was some debris, flying out. And you can kind of see some of it right here. So initially I wasn't sure what it was, but now that I can get a better look at it, it appears to be dirt. So there is a bunch of dirt kind of falling off the bottom of the machine, but I think this stuff was actually blowing out through the cooling fins. So there could be some dirt or mud inside the blower housing. I think we should take a look at that just to make sure that everything's clean and the engine can cool properly. But before we do that, let's get the oil changed while it's hot. This machine has definitely earned it. So the oil that came out actually looks pretty good. There is no hint of metallic in there. So, likely the engine's in good health. When we did the leak down test, we saw that. But when we did the compression test, that disagrees. Even after the adjustments that we made, it only came up to 30 psi when it should actually be 60. Now, the thing I find really strange is that we had the same issue with this one here last week. And I know the person who dropped these off actually purchased both of these from the original owner who bought them at the same time. So, I'm wondering if it's a problem with this batch or potentially this particular model. But what I noticed is that when I look at the model info and just note it 0059396 and also the serial number, it ends in 311. If we go over to the other machine, the one we're working on right now, you'll see that it is not only the same model, but if you look at the serial number, it's the very next one. It ends in 312. So yeah, I don't know if this was just a bad day manufacturing or if all these machines with the same model have this problem. So just something to keep in mind. If you have this model and it's hard to start, you might want to check the clearance on the exhaust because the compression release might be your problem. So as far as the missing foot goes, that was there last week. I actually stole it to make the other machine complete. But I do have a test Generac GP7500 frame. The only purpose of it is just to hold the engines while I test them. And this has the foot that we're missing. So let's get one of those off and move it on over. So we don't actually need to remove the carb, but it does need to be loose. So we can just slide it out a bit. That way, when we remove the bolts from the blower housing, that should have enough clearance to come out. It actually looks pretty clean in here. You know, I was expecting to see some dirt or mud or something, but yeah, I'm not seeing that. So either it all blew out or it was never in here to begin with. Yeah, I think it's safe to get the airbox installed. And the filter that came with this machine, it could be used. It's a little dirty, and it's kind of has that feel like it doesn't have much time left before it starts flaking apart. So I do have another filter. It's about the same size, maybe a little bit bigger, but I think we can fit it in there. Yeah, new filters on the right. Definitely thicker, taller, wider. But that's not a bad thing. It's going to just fit better and less likely to let stuff through. So foam filters, they do need to be oiled up. So I usually put a generous amount on, kind of work it in, and then just use a towel to soak up the excess. So we get the breather back installed. This is actually easier to do before you put the filter in, but you can do it after without too much issue. And then this here is where the tank vent would connect, but the Honda clone tank that this machine has vents from the cap. So we're just going to use a vacuum cap to plug that leak so that the air can't bypass the filter. So I think we're pretty much ready to go here. And like the machine we tested last week, I think this one's going to pass with flying colors. You know, we did the leak down test. We saw the engine was in good health. Really, the only problem here is the compression release is letting out a little bit too much compression. So it might be hard to start. But once started, I think we'll have no problem pulling its rated load of 5,500 watts. So let's get the engine started. While it's warming up, we'll double check the output using the kilowatt to measure the frequency and the voltage. We'll use the amp probe to measure the total harmonic distortion and the oscilloscope to see what the sine wave looks like. If everything checks out, we'll put on a half load, give that a bit of time, and then we'll bring it up to the max of 5,500 watts. All right, not too bad. All things considered, we started on the second pull. The engine is running nice and smooth, and the THD without a load isn't too bad. We're starting at about 4.1%, and the sine wave, fairly typical. So let's put on a 2,500 watt load and see how it does. So let's start with a quick 2,000 watts. Yeah, the speed dropped a little more than I'd like for such a light load. Let's try another 500. Yeah, it sounds like it's slowing down a little bit too much. So we'll check that in a minute. Under 2,500 watts, we're at about 15% THD. And the sine wave, a little distorted, but pretty typical. So let's give this a few minutes, and then we'll check back. So yeah, the engine speed, it's a little bit slower than I'd expect. Ideally under this kind of a load would be around 60 Hertz. And instead we're at about 58.5. So technically we're still okay, but we're gonna have to keep an eye on it as we increase the load. So let's do that now. Let's bring it up to 3,000 watts. It's holding steady. 3,500, 4,000. Yeah, it's holding steady. So let's swap this out. Bring it back to 4,000. How about 4,500, 5,000? Yeah, this one's not happy. We are above 57 Hertz, but you can see it is oscillating a tiny bit. And I thought I heard an odd noise, like possibly an engine problem, but that was only for a split second, so maybe we're okay. Let's try bringing it up. We're back to 5,000 watts. Now we're at 5,500. So that's the rated load, and we're at 17% THD, and the sine wave looks about the same. So let's give this a few minutes and see how it does. And no issues at all, pulling its rated load of 5,500 watts. So, yeah, I wouldn't say it's doing it as convincing as the one we tested last week, but it is doing it. So let's see if we can do a little more. Let's try 6,000. Yep. Let's swap it. Now we're back to 6. How about 6,500? Yep. 7,000. Yeah. Although it's out of power, it's starting to oscillate. So very similar to what we saw on the machine we tested last week. No issues getting to its rated load. And we can even go beyond it. So, not too bad. All right, guys, and that is pretty much a wrap. You know, this machine performed quite well. You know, despite the compression release issues, we were able to get a cold engine started in just 2 pulls. You know, it ran quite well, and my initial concerns about the engine speed, I think, were unwarranted because, you know, without a load, we started at about 61 Hertz, and under a full load, you know, that speed came down to 57.5. So on a system like this with a mechanical governor, you're always going to have some governor droop from no load to full load. And typically it's between 3 and maybe on the high side about 5 Hertz. In this case, we were at 3.5. So that is pretty much perfect. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.